Complex trauma, severe injuries or illness, severe illness. I've watched a lot of podcasts from Diary of a CEO by Stephen Steve Bartlett. So Stephen Bartlett interviews a lot of experts in different fields, and he's not the only one. And it feels like many experts speak of what the average person is struggling with, or expert interpretation of what the majority are struggling with. And many don't understand the complexity of severe illness. And I say that as I'm still recovering from schizophrenia, and my first-hand experience and the level of care I still need is 9 years ago. I was in Fort McMurray, Alberta during the forest fire evacuation. And the care and support I got as a result of the fire evacuation is the care I need now. And another way to explain that is much like a refugee. Refugees need all kinds of supports and resources, and I would say a lot of us need that kind of support. And I've struggled a long time I've known that was the solution, though I didn't know how to test that. I didn't know how somebody would come to understand that that's the level of care I need, or anybody with severe illness. And so in recent days, I've given that a lot of thought. How to help somebody who cannot help themselves. How to test if somebody can or cannot help themselves, and how to provide them with the appropriate supports and resources. And so testing them is one thing, and it's important. And as important, Chris Voss discovered how to test liars and or people who are uncomfortable. Lying is another thing Chris Voss teaches us is master negotiator. Is lying is only one way people show they're uncomfortable. So testing somebody with a severe illness has to treat them exactly like Chris Voss does, by looking for signs they're uncomfortable, a change in affect, an affect shift. Lying is only one. Change of tone, pacing, inflection, body language are other signs somebody is uncomfortable. And so That's how you test somebody who's severely ill. If there's any change in behavior, it's because they're uncomfortable. If they're angry, if they cry, it's because they've got in severe illness. A change in affect shift is because they're triggered. Well, a change in affect shift triggers anybody for different reasons, though in severe illness, that's a sign of an injury or an illness, or that they're uncomfortable talking about a subject. And there's better ways to expose those injuries, though what's important goes back to using what Chris Voss calls the quick 2+1. What I call, I don't like calling it basic comms. I gotta find, everybody already does the skills, not intentionally, not trained, not on purpose. You might use it in the bar, at the grocery store, in a conversation with a friend, coworker. And if we learn to use the skills, the quick 2+1, anybody can do it, everybody can do it, and it doesn't take a lot of training or practice. All it is using 4 or 5, I'm going to say 5 labels. Seems like, looks like, sounds like, feels like, and I'm adding smells like. Smells like is in a context where you can put some comedy in. And so all of that is followed by silence. The other part of the quick 2+1 is the upward or downward mirror, followed by silence. The upward inflection in a mirror makes it sound like a question. And the downward inflection in a mirror makes it sound like an understanding statement. So, followed by silence, and so that makes the other person talk. Even an understanding statement, especially with silence. So you're still gathering more information, and so in testing severe illness, you want the other person to talk. You want to make them feel heard. And here's the thing is, if you use an appropriate label, you can do the talking. They don't have to say a word to start. You could say the first sentence and make them feel heard. Like nobody's heard them before. If you can make them feel heard like nobody's heard them before, twice so far I've made people cry. Tears of joy. At least twice. And So you can do all the heavy thinking to before talking to somebody with severe illness, and you can label what it looks like, sounds like, seems like, feels like, and you could even use smells like. To label their point of view from their shoes, from their angle, from their context. Make them feel heard like nobody's heard them before. Give them the silence, so that followed by silence, encouraging them to talk. And to test the injury, to test the severe illness, to provide them with appropriate resources. And the other thing that's important with testing severe illness, Professor Dr. John Reed has gathered a lot of information on schizophrenia, and he says the difference, the key in severe illness lies between 3 to 5 traumatic stressors. People with 3 traumas are 18 times more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia. And people with 5 traumas are 193 times more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia. So that's really the key. And the problem is if somebody says they have 3 traumas, they probably have more. They may not trust you they might be embarrassed. Think about the significance. People around the world rather die than be embarrassed. So why would anybody tell you anything? That's why Chris says it's important to label their emotions. So if they say they have 3 traumas, they could have more. And so 3 to 5 traumas is really, it's not that you have to have 5 to be severely ill. You could have 3. Everybody's got different tolerances. There's lots of science to explain that. So one of my favorite examples is early 2000. They put a lot of soldiers through different brain tests, and they found that all kinds of stuff. And so people who are not traumatized, their hippocampus grew. And it was a different opposite effect for people who were traumatized. So stress is good, but to a certain point. And Ian Robertson talks about that, about the benefit of good stress. So testing severe illness. using labels and mirrors and silence. Looking for signs people are uncomfortable with the change in affect shift. And a change in affect shift shows a trigger, shows an injury, and or injury, depending on the severity of the discomfort. And the discomfort, like I said before, it could be anger, could be sadness, could be laughter, could be shaking, could be stuttering, could be lower, higher tone, inflection, pacing in the voice, besides pacing in body language. So look for signs they're triggered. Test those using labels. So if somebody says they're injured by such and such, you could say, I'm sorry, it sounds like XYZ. And it doesn't mean Chris Voss has better ways to expose those injuries. That gets into complicated territory. Learned, trained, practiced skills. Whereas using labels and silence, or mirrors and silence, we all practice those skills. It takes little training or practice. It's just a matter of choosing to practice those skills. And those skills can be practiced at any time, anywhere. And so if we've determined that somebody is struggling with severe illness, then they need appropriate resources, much like a refugee or an evacuee. And with appropriate support. And yeah, I think, and there's a clear difference between the majority of people who need to vent to help themselves and some of us who need intensive care, who can't help ourselves. And the conventional thinking talked about by experts often does not apply for somebody with severe illness. It seems crazy to think that somebody with a half dozen or a dozen injuries should be treating one injury at a time while the other injuries are, dismissed? How long should somebody live with multiple injuries while treating one injury, simultaneously getting different injuries from different events around the community? So while it seems therapists focus on one injury or injury group, somebody might have multiple injuries compounded by different injuries they might be getting somewhere else from different things or different people. And so does it seem crazy to think severe illness should have multiple injuries treated at the same time, like intensive care? And I think that touches on why all the veterans groups are different individuals, not just groups, but individuals are creating different resources for veterans because they're not getting the help they need from therapists. It seems clear that therapists are not listening to veterans in need. When veterans are required to start their own support groups. On a positive note, I don't know how to end this with a positive twist. I might I would end by saying seems we can improve our communication skills by using Chris Voss skills. How do I reword that? That's not quite right. Socratic method to ask questions, improved by Chris Voss skills so that it's received, because Socrates was sentenced to death. Chris Voss discovered that everybody likes to send and receive labels, and that everybody can practice labels and mirrors to ask questions, and that improves communication, avoids miscommunication, provides clarification on what we think somebody else might have said or tried to say or failed to say, listening to what is not said. I did that with my mechanic, where my mechanic is outside of town. I wasn't sure if I was going to stop by during business hours. I wanted to make sure I could pay him so I can pick up my vehicle any time of day in case I was late. And I heard his voice change. I heard a change in affect in my mechanic's voice when I asked if I could pay by e-transfer. I don't know if I would not say I heard a disappointment, though maybe a struggle to accept an e-transfer. He said it was okay, though that's not what I heard. The words were, "That's okay," though his tone and inflection and pacing suggested it wasn't. He didn't lie, but his voice said he was uncomfortable. With an e-transfer. So I used a label, said it sounds like it'd be better if I paid at the till with a debit card, and he said, and his tone and his voice sighed of relief when he said yes. It wasn't a simple yes. There was a whole lot more that was said than just the word yes. The words that what was said in the word yes, what was expressed, that's a better way to put it. What was expressed with the word yes was a great big sigh of relief. These are all skills we can all practice. Just few simple things. Well, the hard part is changing our habits to practice these skills. It can improve communication. And so that's why I call these basic comms and important in testing severe illness. It seems there isn't yet a process to test and treat severe illness. And so I think that's a positive note to end on, is using labels. Sounds like, looks like, seems like, feels like, smells like. And followed by silence. A mirror with an upward inflection makes it sound like a question. And a mirror with a downward inflection makes it sound like an understanding statement, followed by silence. The understanding statement followed by silence encourages people to talk, just like asking a question. So that means you've got more information, clarifying what you think you might have heard, clarifying what they did not say. Avoids miscommunication, improves our chances of treating severe illness. So I think this might be the first time I've talked about. I've been thinking a lot about treating severe illness the last couple of weeks. This might be my best first attempt at vocalizing that. Have a good night.